Hello, and welcome to this preview video of Act 1, Scenes 2 to 5, which I titled, Is Love a Passion or a Business Deal? Um, Hopefully, we lean towards passion, but I guess it depends on who you are. Um, so, I would begin class by asking any questions that students may have about the prologue and the first scene that we spent yesterday on. And they also did a little writing homework that we would discuss as well. Um, but again, hopefully, these videos are helpful. What I do again is I will preview that day's film. We'll kind of workshop in class key moments, like iconic moments, and then we'll watch it. And then they go home and read and listen to the audiobook and then do a little bit of writing. That's generally the problem. That way they experience it visually, they experience it with a guide, and then they listen to an unabridged dramatization. So they experience it a few different ways. So the next scene after the first scene of the play, which is complete passionate warfare in the street, and then a kid who's completely passionate about this girl who won't love him back, Rosalind. We move now to the very sort of serious adult room of Juliet's father, who they just call Capulet, his last name. And there's a noble, wealthy gentleman named Paris who wants to marry Juliet. And interestingly, when we first meet Juliet's father, Capulet, he says some what seem to be pretty modern things. He resists a quick marriage for his daughter because she's only 13. And Paris says some creepy things that, younger than her in Verona are mother's maid. So there's like 12-year-old mothers walking around. So therefore, you should have no problem me marrying your 13-year-old. In a modern context, this sounds really disturbing. But in a world, I guess, where life expectancy is like 40s, it's maybe less disturbing. I don't know. But here's the line. It's Act 1, Scene 2, line 16. And again, I use the Folger edition. Whatever edition you have, annotate your books. Interact. Capulet says, Juliet's dad says, woo her, gentle Paris. Get her heart. Gentle doesn't mean personality. Gentle means Paris is nobility. He's a gentleman. So this gentleman is acknowledging that in the man that wants to marry his daughter. But he did say, you have to do some work here. This is not simply a business deal. I want her to fall in love with you. This is clearly said in the second scene of the play. Please don't forget that. Underline that in the text. And what ends up happening is Capulet's father organizes a formal party, a dance, a ball. And at that dance, that will allow Paris and Juliet to meet. Until recently, and I do this when I teach Pride and Prejudice, we have a longer conversation about dating back then. And that's obviously long after Shakespeare. That, there wasn't Match.com. You didn't hang around in bars. You were never alone with your spouse until after you were married. So this sort of business arrangement was not strange. And I think most of the original audience, I don't think the Globe Theater opened, in 1601. So the Globe wasn't even open, but when this play debuted in, I think, 1596. But the original audience of Romeo and Juliet would have been filled with, a lot of women who probably didn't even choose their own spouses. So they're watching this thing, woo her, get her heart. How strange that would have been. So Romeo and his buddies are walking the street. We have just heard that there's going to be a party at the Capulet's house. Obviously, the least invited people to a party at the Capulet's house are the enemy family, the Montagues, Romeo's family. But stupidly or not stupidly, Lord Capulet gives an illiterate messenger the job of telling this list of people on paper to invite to a party. So this messenger, not in a position to argue with his master, leaves, wanders the street looking for help. And he says to Romeo, I pray you, sir, can you read? And Romeo there finds out that his beloved Rosalind will be at this party. So Romeo and his friends conspire to go. This is dangerous. They will be wearing masks, but this is dangerous. And it's important to note that Romeo and Juliet's meeting, spoiler alert, it's the second scene of the play, and the play is called Romeo and Juliet. I don't think I'm spoiling much. But their meeting is contrived solely because an illiterate messenger was chosen to invite people. So purely by accident do they meet. And I don't think that's unusual. Talk to your parents, your grandparents, ask them how they met. Oftentimes it was a chance moment in time. Then we meet Juliet in the third scene. And I just want to point out a couple of things. Again, my citations from the play are from the Folger edition. And I think it's good to mark this up. We meet Juliet. We meet her mother, who's Lady Capulet. And if you're wondering, how do I remember Capulet's Montagues? It's Juliet Capulet. So it rhymes. And this is the nurse. Now, we associate nurse with the men and women who work in hospitals. But nurse literally meant the woman hired by usually a wealthy family. Woman would be pregnant while the mother of a wealthy family would be pregnant. And the nurse, when the mother would give birth, the nurse they hired would literally breastfeed or nurse the wealthy mother's daughter and the nurse's own daughter at the same time. That was not weird to hire out the intimate parenting responsibilities that we all do as parents now. So Juliet is called, and her first response is, "How now? Who calls?" This very immediately responding to the adults in her life. That's when we meet her. She's a girl. We learned that she's 13, and she immediately responds to the adults in her life. And Lady Capulet has to tell her that you're going to meet this guy, Paris, at the party that we're throwing for you so you can meet him. Do you think you could like him? And Juliet's response is this line on line 103. I will look to like if looking liking move. Shakespeare often puts verbs at the end because they're strong, emphatic words. We normally don't combine words like this. What she's really saying is, you want me to like him? I hope so. If looking moves me to like him, or if looking makes me like him, I'll do that. She's obedient. You might get lost the first time through with what the nurse says. What we learn quickly is that the nurse's baby that was Juliet's age was named Susan, and she died young. And it always looks like the nurse, we can have lots of opinions as the play goes on about the nurse, but even here, who's closest to Juliet physically? The nurse. Who's Juliet looking at? The nurse. The mother's in a formal gown and formally sort of staged like this. That's sort of symbolic of the fact that the hired help that was hired to mother Juliet in many ways knows her better and is closer to her than the mother is. But I think my takeaway from this moment is how kind and generous and obedient to authority Juliet is here. And that's important to keep in mind later. Then, and I guarantee the first time going through this you will be slightly lost, we meet Shakespeare's unbelievably fascinating friend, Mercutio. Mercutio is not in Shakespeare's family. Mercutio is not like Benvolio, who's a cousin. He's a friend. And I think that's important because Mercutio is this very sort of racy, smart. He's almost like a dirtier, more prototypical Hamlet guy who can manipulate language in whatever direction he wants. Romeo associates with him by choice, not because he's related. I think that's interesting. They're on their way to the party. And if you go to Act 1, Scene 4, line 53, Romeo just says the throwaway line, I had a dream tonight. Mercutio says, so do I. So did I. Romeo says, what was yours? Mercutio says that dreamers often lie. And it's interesting that you know Romeo and Mercutio are friends, because listen to these two lines. Well, what was yours that dreamers often lie? Or, I dreamt a dream tonight, and so did I. They're speaking in iambic pentameter lines together, which is a musical way of hearing people really be in sync with each other. And And Romeo says, yeah, they lie in bed asleep while they do dream things true. And Mercutio launches into the longest speech in the play, I believe, the Queen Mab speech. The Queen Mab is from English folklore, and Queen Mab is the queen of all the fairies, mischievous but benevolent. And Queen Mab grants you your wishes while you're in your dreams. So don't worry about getting lost. But for whatever reason, people seem worried about Romeo. Benvolio is trying to get him, make him feel better in Act 1, Scene 1 by telling him to examine other beauties, because Rosalind does love you back. But Mercutio has a whole different approach. He goes on this like mythological whirlwind tour of images. First, we get a physical description of Queen Mab, and then we get all the different people, lovers, courtiers, lawyers, ladies, and what Queen Mab grants them for their dreams. And if you go to the very end of the speech, it's starting to get dirty. Maids lying on their backs, and they learn how to bear, and that's when Romeo interrupts him, and they they get to the party. But you get the sense that Mercutio could sort of riff poetically, kind of forever, if the play let him. But don't worry about interpreting him. I just want to point out that he's utterly different than the other guys in this play, other characters in this play, and he's just worth paying attention to. And then the ultimate example in the history of literature regarding love at first sight. Remember, Romeo goes to this party to meet Rosalind. He has never heard of Juliet. He sees Juliet, and he sees Juliet at the play, and he says in line 51, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. So Rosalind who, right? And if you go to line 104, I'm going to walk through this a little bit. This isn't a world where men and women were not allowed to touch each other even while dancing. So you would move around and your hands would be that close. It'd be tantalizingly close, but you wouldn't touch. Romeo, in the midst of this party that he's not supposed to be at, remember what the prince said. If you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. Any other fight breaks out, you die. Even with that threat, Romeo, it's not this. He grabs her hand and he says, if I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this. My lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. This is a medieval shrine, and these are pilgrims, literally, who are going to pray to probably the reliquary, a statue of a saint, or maybe the bodily relics of a saint, bones, stuff like that. And this is an old school way to talk about your beloved. Talk to her like she's a statue, put her on a literal pedestal and worship her, right? So Romeo's doing like the traditional thing. Juliet is a shrine that I'm going to go pray to, and my lips are pilgrims that want to touch the saint that Juliet is. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, if I somehow make dirty you're the shrine. The gentle sin is this, that my lips are two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. So a very traditional opening. Juliet responds. She's 13, probably never been on a date, right? There's no dating. She takes his metaphor of being a pilgrim and keeps going, and she says, good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which manly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch. So if you go to the statue of a saint and the pilgrims touch the statue, that's normal. And another word for pilgrim is palmer. And she says, and palm to palm is holy Palmer's kiss. So she takes his metaphor and kind of not plays hard to get. She's just being honest, right? She said, no, it's not about kissing. The only things that touch for a pilgrim is their hands when they pray. That's what's kissing. Romeo says, well, have not saints' lips and holy Palmer's too? Okay. Juliet, yes, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. And then Romeo's had enough. Oh, then, dear saint, let lips, this is brilliant, let lips do what hands do. They pray. But what he's really meaning is they touch. Let's please touch lips like hands do when they pray. Grant thou lest faith turn to despair. And Juliet says, well, saints don't move, right? Because they're statues. This is like a statue of St. Agnes, like still. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Will saints grant your prayers, but we don't move. And Romeo says, okay, I'll move. Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. My prayer's effect just means my kiss. I'm going to take it from you. Now, here's what's interesting. I talked about sonnets when we looked at the first chunk of the poem. This is their conversation. It's a sonnet. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this. My lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Well, have not saints lips, and holy palmers too? I, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. They move not, while my prayer's effect I take. And that's pretty good. I joke with my students, if you ever meet someone and your first conversation is a legitimate sonnet, you probably want to get that person's number. But then, obviously, things happen in the play to make that more complicated. They keep going. Thus from my lips by thine my sin is purged. Then have my lips the sin that they have took. Oh, sin from my lips. Trespass sweetly urge, give me my sin again. Then she finishes the line, you kiss by the book, which either means she's saying you don't kiss great or you're an amazing kisser. They're only interrupted in their sonnet making by the nurse who calls. I read one scholar that said it's almost like they're so in sync with each other when they meet that left uninterrupted, maybe they would speak sonnets forever. I just love that idea. Although, if you're ordering breakfast at a restaurant, that probably would get old pretty quickly. And then the scene ends. Romeo leaves the party, and Juliet, not knowing who he is, they don't exchange numbers and whatever. The nurse ends up saying, "That's the son of your enemy. That's a Montague." And Juliet says, "My only love sprung from my only hate." Wow, love already. They met 3 minutes ago. That's fast. Too early seen, unknown, and known to be late. It's just incredible what's happened in the first act of this play, from the spoiler prologue to the street fight to an arranged party leaning towards an arranged marriage to amazing speeches and Mercutio's business to meeting the nurse to meeting Juliet to Juliet going from a very obedient girl to making out with a guy at her party at her house to then realizing that this is the one guy she can't have. So it's an incredibly action-packed, dynamic first act. I think one of Shakespeare's greatest gifts is beginning his best plays in an incredibly dynamic way that gets your attention. What I asked my students to do tonight is to respond to both of the prompts. Using one quote from the text, write a one-paragraph response to what stands out to you about Romeo and Juliet's first moments together. Sometimes I'll give a more specific thing there because we'll go over that sonnet together. But I don't know, maybe it's something that they saw in the film. Secondly, and I like doing this, using one quote from the text from these scenes, write some sentences about something you noticed. Maybe something that we didn't. Maybe something Tybalt says at the party. We didn't even discuss him. And I have a little example here about how to quote the play. But I hope this preview video helps you, and happy reading and viewing.